Go. Hello, Bill, again.
Hello, Conn. It's good to have you back on the Weekend Blog. Sorry for folks that were expecting Kristen Soltis, who we announced would be rotating with Matt Lewis as regulars for the Weekend Blog, but Kristen and I had a scheduling hiccup, but she will be on soon enough. But it's always good to have the original conservative TWIB shareholder, Conn Carroll from the Heritage Foundation, back on board. So it's good to see you.
I'll keep Krista's seat warm any day.
So much of the blog commentary this week, obviously centering around the assassination attempt of Congressman Giffords in Tucson and the 6 fatalities that happened there. Much blog commentary trying to affix blame or deflect blame. And I sense that in the conservative blogosphere, a great deal of defensiveness, but you might not characterize it that way.
Yeah, I don't know about defensiveness. We're definitely fired up and ready for a fight, unless that's too violent of a term. But we're trying to keep our good humor about us. Pageman Yusevov had a great post over at Checkerboard Nights called "The Underpants Gnome Theory of the Arizona Shootings." Of course, a reference to the famous South Park episode where the underpants gnomes steal everyone's underpants and want to get rich, but don't really have that second key idea about how to do it. And so he writes, Phase 1, Sarah Palin publishes a map. Phase 2, ? Phase 3, gunfire. And so, of course, this post draws humorous light to the fact that there is a somewhat key missing link in the liberal syllogism, the leftist syllogism, that Glenn Beck and Sarah Palin caused this shooting. And, really, I was looking forward to today because I honestly wanted to ask you, where are you on this? Because, you have Paul Krugman and Matthew Iglesias and Crazy Andy and, most of the professional left saying...
I don't know who Crazy Andy is.
Oh, that'd be Andrew Sullivan.
I'm not sure he's professional left, let alone
he is
crazy.
But they actually believe. I realized this when I was watching Michelle Goldberg. They actually believe that there is this climate of hate, created by Limbaugh and Beck and Palin that caused this. And then there's some other people, like Nate Silver, Jonathan Chait, some other people who have said that the left should calm down, that there really is no link here. That there is no evidence of this. So I wanted to ask you, despite the fact that there's no evidence that the Arizona shooter, looked at talk radio, listened to radio, was a Republican or a Tea Party in any way, do you believe that Limbaugh and Beck and Palin caused this shooting?
Well, I'm not quite sure that I'd say it's the consensus of the left, let alone myself, that Sarah Palin and Glenn Beck and others are the primary cause of the assassination attempt. I do there is legitimate discussion whether that having a violent climate in your discourse might have some kind of effect on a mentally ill person. And Greg Sargent at the Plum Line, one of the Washington Post blogs, just interviewed a mental health expert at Duke University, saying that it's a legitimate question to ask, and it's not that it's so easy to pin down and confirm something specific like that. But it's certainly not an out of left field conversation to jump to a conclusion and say that definitely because there's this one map with crosshairs, and it means that this person would not have done it if that map did not exist. I think that is even a logical jump that I think very, very few on the left are making. But most are making more of an argument that's saying at least acknowledge that these sorts of things are generally inappropriate and take some level of responsibility for that. And so when there's been this huge, I would still say defensive reaction on the right, I think it does make some folks in the left or the middle scratch their heads saying, why are you, why are you getting so upset about having this conversation?
Yeah, well, I thought it was funny, to watch, Think Progress and Matt Iglesias and also, again, Crazy Andy go after David Frum for suggesting that pot caused this. Because there's actually way more evidence that pot caused this shooting than
way,
there is.
Way more?
Well, yes.
We
yes,
know
well,
that someone said he smoked pot.
There's zero evidence that, Limbaugh or Beck or Palin did it, but we know for a fact that he smoked pot. So that means there's zero compared to some would be way more evidence that pot caused this. So I found it funny that they would go off and automatically, say that idea was silly, but hold so sacred the idea that Limbaugh, Beck, and Palin caused this.
In these early days of...
and for the record, I don't think pot caused this either.
Duly noted. I'm actually reading a book about Columbine right now. And
good times.
What's that?
Good times.
Yes, my wife's a little disturbed that I've chosen this reading material. But one of the amazing things about the story is how much the media got wrong in the early days. And because little dribs and drabs of things come out and get turned into headlines, and about 90% of the other facts and the surrounding context are not known yet, or maybe known by investigators or not by the public. And so it's very easy to take one internet posting that the shooter did and extrapolate a whole bunch of conclusions out of it. And I think folks all over the place do stuff like that. I know plenty of conservatives during Columbine were absolutely positive that video games caused that school shooting.
I got a link here from the video gamer community saying that they're not to blame for the shooting either.
Right.
Plus the hard rock bands that he liked.
Right. Newt Gingrich was very adamant that Democrats caused Susan Smith to drown her children, with, I would say, no evidence whatsoever. So this is a game that conservatives have played for a long time. And I don't think that most on the left are saying explicitly, because Glenn Beck did this, because Sarah Palin did this, that means the shooting happened. But they're saying whatever chance that there was an indirect effect here, there is this broader, because it's not just one or two isolated comments, that there has been a drumbeat of commentary on the right that has violent overtones. You talk about things like Second Amendment remedies and feeding the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants.
Which is a Thomas Jefferson quote, no?
It's a Thomas Jefferson quote that is being used in a far more incendiary context when directed at individual people in modern day. When that type of stuff is happening on a regular basis and treating those in who hold office as literal enemies to the country, it's not totally out of line to say, wait a second, is there some way this is having some kind of indirect effect on mentally ill people? Does that mean that it's absolutely certain that it did have that effect? Absolutely not. And it would probably behoove everybody to take a breath and let the investigation go forth and get more facts, put it into context before making conclusions. But at the same time, I think it's awfully strange for Sarah Palin and others to spend the bulk of their time over the past week justifying what, regardless of what the shooter did, are pretty outrageous remarks and political propaganda on their own accord.
Well, I think that's a great point.
Instead of talking about ways that we can prevent shootings.
Let's drill down on that a little bit. Will Wilkinson had a great tweet. He wrote, "The left thinks the right rhetoric is more effective and wants to neutralize the advantage in response to a dispiriting electoral defeat. I think that's a very pithy 140-character summation of exactly what is going on here. Is that the left has been getting their butts kicked in the debate. They got their butts kicked in the election, and they're taking this tragedy and running with it as fast as they could to delegitimize the images and phrases of conservatives as much as possible." And so, you said that it's not just a couple phrases here and there. It's a larger vocabulary. So, let's look at that for a little while. First read, written by the staff over at MSNBC, had a couple of phrases that they said people should condemn. Their Second Amendment remedies, don't retreat, instead reload, gather your armies, socialism. So they're trying to get rid of this lexicon. I mean, do you think that when conservatives use the word socialist, that is something that should be on the pale?
I mean, I think calling things socialist is beyond the pale on the merits, in that what you're talking about
Well, I don't care if you disagree with it. We're talking
socialism.
specifically about if it leads to the climate of hatred that you believe caused this shooting.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Do you believe that using the word socialist adds to the climate of hatred that you believe caused this shooting?
I wouldn't say that. I don't know what caused the shooting. I'm not saying anything has caused the shooting.
Okay, well, Paul Krugman, Andrew Sullivan, all the rest of them believe that this climate of hate caused the shooting.
Well,
Do you
I
believe
can't
using
speak
words
for them,
like socialist?
I think what they're talking about more is not so much the socialism line in and of itself, when it's coupled with this Second Amendment theory, that the Second Amendment is there so we have a massed armed populace that can overthrow a tyrannical government when it does things that a handful of folks on the far right think is socialism, and then talk about using Second Amendment remedies if we can't get our aims through the ballot box.
So it sounds like you're
all
narrowing.
that
Sounds like you're
combined
narrowing
with
here.
the socialism line is explicitly violent rhetoric.
So if they just took out the gun part, so we could still say gather your armies and the rest of it.
There are certain ways you can say gather your armies in a clearly metaphorical
but just
way.
as long as we didn't, in some way, reference guns, that'd be fine. We wouldn't be calling.
Pat Buchanan in 1992 talked about gathering your pitchforks. I'm not a huge Pat Buchanan fan. He says plenty of things that I find beyond the pale. But that kind of stuff is clearly metaphor. Clearly just talking about, rallying the grassroots in some way. I think there are ways you can say gather your armies in a way that is clearly not violent.
So pitchforks in, guns out.
I am not writing the style book, Conn.
Well, somebody has to, right?
You don't have to be thick.
Somebody has to.
You can speak like a normal human being. But there's obviously ways to talk about general grassroots politics in a way that is obviously not violent, and there's ways to talk about Second Amendment remedies, which clearly is violent.
Well,
which is saying we are going to shoot people if we don't get our way.
Well, CBS has a poll out that shows that, the vast majority of the American people do not believe that political rhetoric causes violence. So it's just a minority of the professional left that believe that this happens. So we have to ask you guys, since you're the ones that have this problem about political rhetoric causing things, we have to ask you what is in and out of bounds, if it's only in your mind that this exists.
Well, this is not a question of poll numbers. It's a question of facts and mental health science. You're not going to poll whether this actually happened one way or not. I'm sure lots of people, if you polled them, would say Combine happened for one reason or another. That's not true, because most people don't know the facts. So that's not in any way a data point.
So do you think we're ever going to get to the social science that can pin down exactly which words cause events like these and which words don't?
I don't think anyone is arguing. I don't think anybody's arguing that one specific word uttered in one specific instance and certain words always cause something. You don't... You're not a stupid person, Conn. I know you're not a stupid person.
Thanks, Phil.
But you're purposely asking me stupid questions.
I don't. They're perfectly reasonable questions considering what the left is arguing.
Why don't we shift towards perhaps a different subject here?
Okay. Do you want to do Sheriff Dupnik?
If you like.
Sure. So, did you read the Arizona Republic editorial on Dupnik?
I have not. You share.
Okay. Well, basically, the Sheriff Dupnik, as everyone knows, went out within hours after the shooting, and like Paul Krugman and the rest of the professional left, immediately started saying that this was all thanks to the Tea Partiers and hatred and the rest of it, even though he had no evidence to the contrary. Although he didn't say this at the time, he didn't say it had no evidence. It wasn't until later that people started asking him. I think Megyn Kelly was the first that got him to admit that he literally had no evidence that the rhetoric, caused a shooting. But he still was going on everywhere. Went on NBC the next day on the Today Show, and blamed Rush Limbaugh by name. So the Arizona Republic had an editorial, basically calling him out. And this is a paper that has endorsed many Democrats in the past. They're not a liberal paper. They're pretty I don't think they're as liberal as the New York Times. If they're just a local standard bearer paper, basically calling him out, saying maybe Sheriff Dupnik should be focusing more on law enforcement and less on partisan speech making. And Michelle Malkin's been all over him. Same with Rush Limbaugh, who, of course, fired back personally. Andy McCarthy had some good points about how he was jeopardizing any future prosecution against Dupnik. And so I was searching to the left, and I couldn't...
These are all folks, I should add, who in plenty of other instances are very, very quick to assign blame without having all the facts on hand.
Are they law enforcement officials?
No, I'm talking about the conservative bloggers that you cited.
Are they elected law enforcement officials?
No, they're conservative bloggers.
Okay, so I think that's a pretty big distinction. Is that Rush
Limbaugh? Two separate comments.
Rush Limbaugh is not an elected law enforcement official.
He can still be a hypocrite. He's still allowed to be a hypocrite.
That's fine, but he's not, an elected law enforcement official charged with keeping the people of Tucson safe. Sheriff Dupnik is.
Sheriff, because he's an elected official, he is still allowed to give an opinion about what he think might be an indirect cause of something. I don't think he has ever said...
So you have no problem with his...
Can I say something?
Can I
get a word in
sure.
here? He is not saying that Rush Limbaugh is prosecutable. He is not saying in his professional capacity that he has any evidence to press charges against individual people. He is not saying that their free speech rights are in any way should be abridged. But he is speaking as a private citizen, giving an opinion.
No. This is during climate. These were doing official press conferences
to safety in his state.
You're telling me that for the first instance was on a professional press conference, so that's not as an individual citizen.
Fair enough.
And when he's talking to Today Show, he's not talking to Today Show as everyday citizen, Clarence Dupnik. He's talking
but he's not saying, I, as sheriff, am going to be gathering evidence to haul Rush Limbaugh into court. He's not saying that.
No, that's not what I'm accusing him of all. I'm just saying that perhaps when a law enforcement official should be, if anybody, more than the media, should be, gathering facts during this time, it should be maybe the law enforcement officials. And so to have him going off spouting opinions like this, instead of actually doing his job.
Well, you're now making
facts.
an assumption that he can't say opinions and do his job at the same time.
Oh, no, see, you're wrong there, too, because he was on Keith Olbermann on MSNBC on Countdown on Monday night, and Keith asked him about the raid on Loughner's house that night, and he said, I'm sorry, I've been doing media all day. I don't have any of those details.
He runs an office, and he has staff, and he has other officials that do that work. So him running, you were making an assumption, not having all the facts about what his office is doing, and presuming he's not doing his job. But you do not know that to be true.
We'll link to the video, and people can draw their own admissions about what he told Keith Olbermann about how he spends his day.
With an incomplete set of facts.
You're right. We can't follow him around all the time. But anyway, we'll also link, of course, to the Arizona Republic editorial. But there's going to be a memorial service tonight.
So by the time this airs, the service will be had.
It's true.
And there's been a degree of commentary trying to tell Obama what he should say, which I find strange. So it's being talked about in a very explicit political way. A matter which...
You find it strange? Did you not read that Politico article from Sunday morning where Ben Smith quoted that Democratic author saying that President Obama needs to deftly pin this on the Tea Partiers?
Well, I think there are people all over the spectrum telling about what he should do for whatever political reason. I find it all strange.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And Chris Cillizza at the Washington Post... looking at other notable presidential speeches made after tragedies in the past, Ronald Reagan after Challenger, Bill Clinton after Oklahoma City, George Bush after 9/11, and he came down with 3 basic lessons: be brief, be idealistic, and be biblical.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Short, sweet, nothing partisan, just, get in there and, talk about unity, God, American exceptionalism, freedom, and we're done.
And not that this is necessarily inherently bad advice. I just find it odd that people's preoccupation would be with Obama's theater of this moment, as opposed to either actual remembrance of those who had died or were injured, or trying to find actual facts about what prompted this, and what does that mean for our policies. We need to change our gun control policies or our mental health policies or the like. So I do find the occupation list sort of odd. But Saliza, then cites Clinton as having a very powerful speech. And going back to Greg Sargent, who said in a National Review post, a lot of conservatives don't find Clinton's speech to be as apolitical as Chris Saliza might have suggested.
Right. I think Sargent had some great quotes from Clinton's speech, and let me predict that Barack Obama's speech tonight will be nothing like that deplorable Clinton speech. Sargent quoted from the speech and then said that it was very soft and idealistic and the rest of it, and I found it to be the exact opposite. This is what Clinton said back then. But we hear so many loud and angry voices in America today whose sole goal seems to be to try to keep some people as paranoid as possible and the rest of us all torn up and upset with each other. They spread hate. They leave the impression that by their very words that violence is acceptable. He goes on, if they insist on being irresponsible with our common liberties, then we must be all the more responsible with our liberties. When they talk of hatred, we must stand against them. When they talk of violence, we must stand against them. When they say things that are irresponsible, then they have egregious conscience. We must call them out on it. So Clinton, deftly, as that Democratic aide told Politico, created a we versus they sentiment, where the we was his administration, and the they, which anyone who wasn't an idiot knew was conservative talk radio, etc. And tried to.
That's an inference that you've made. That's not what he said.
So you're going to tell me that when Clinton sets up this we-they dynamic, that anybody over the age of 14 in this country didn't know exactly who the we and the they were? Is that what you're trying to peddle?
Well, this is a case where this was a literal case of domestic terrorism that came out of a right-wing militia movement. And you could very easily interpret those comments to be specifically referring to violent, militia-like commentary, and not necessarily a Rush Limbaugh. But you do have a case where, when Rush Limbaugh et al. Interpreted as being an attack on them, it then raises the question: does Douth protest too much? Why is it that you think he's talking about?
Let me ask you point blank then. Let's say Obama goes into the same thing and talks about we and they, and talks about angry voices in America, just voices whose sole goal is to keep people paranoid and spread hate. If Obama was to say that and then go into a we versus they, well, what they do you think he would be referring to?
I'm not going to analyze remarks that haven't been made yet. Depending on what he says about who they is, I will interpret what he means by they. When Clinton talked about people talking of hatred and violence. So, again, I haven't reviewed anything that Rush Limbaugh said in 1992. If he said things that talked of violence, I'd say, yes, he's talking about Rush Limbaugh. If he didn't talk of violence, then he's not talking about Rush Limbaugh.
Well, it was
the definition.
It was 95, but anyways. He was 95, but anyways. 95. Anyways, my prediction is we don't see the we-they rhetoric of the Clinton Oklahoma-Obama speech. Well, that's my prediction. We'll see if it comes true.
Now, the big news today, speaking of its vein, was Sarah Palin's video statement, where she clearly presumed that many people have criticized her and her target map that had crosshairs identifying Democrats she wanted defeated. And also talking about her comments about don't retreat, reload. So she took it upon herself to have a video statement, not only expressing sympathy to those who were lost, but then going on about those who were accusing her of having an indirect effect on the shooter, of committing a, quote, blood libel. And this bubbled up in the conservative blogosphere, chiefly led by Glenn Reynolds, who an Instapundit who wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal accusing folks of blood libel. And since then, the ADL and J Street have come together to say this is offensive terminology. It's been used to malign Jews for killing Christians, and so it is totally inappropriate usage of the term. And it seems like even some conservatives think that Palin, did not do herself any favors. Our good friend Matt Lewis chided her and accused her staff of ignorance, not trying to be anti-Semitic, but just saying they were ignorant about the history of the term, and it was a mistake for them to have used it. Ezra Klein said Sarah Palin never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. She could have taken this opportunity, done something more in a leadership vein, and yet she took it as another opportunity to put the spotlight back on herself and play to resentment and act generally defensive. Do you sense that other conservatives are wincing at what Palin did here, or are they cheering her for fighting the good fight?
No. I mean, you definitely see, Jonah Goldberg had a very lengthy, post about why blood libel wasn't a good term to use. Glenn Reynolds, he explained that, he heard it first from a Tony Blankley appearance, and Tony Blankley was specifically talking about soldiers in Haditha who were wrongly accused by John Murtha. But you have seen Alan Dershowitz, who's by no means a conservative blogger, come out at Andrew Breitbart's Big Government site, no less, defending the use of the term blood libel. But I think more importantly, it's just been kind of slip up after slip up for Palin on this. First you had her spokeswoman, Rebecca Mansour, trying to peddle the line that, they weren't targets, they were surveying marks or something. That was just not bought by anybody. And then they went silent for a couple days, and they came up with this video that obviously has this blunder in it. I don't think anyone's too concerned about it. I mean, I remember reading the Glenn Reynolds column and thinking, I don't think he quite is using that term the way I understand it. It was not how I would have phrased it. And I think that's more how conservatives are reacting to it is, we understand what she was trying to say, but that wasn't an artful way to say it. And so I think this does, the whole episode does hurt her chances because, first with the backpedaling on the surveyor's map, the bogus story.
Is that what it's called now, the surveyor's map?
Yeah. The target map, whatever. The bogus story that no one bought, that it was, a surveyor's map instead of a target map. And now this, it just looks like amateur hour. And if her big selling point is going to be, she's a great communicator and she can rile up, the base and the team, then, this week has been her not doing that on a pretty large stage. But I still love her.
You have to say that or else you get all these nasty emails.
But I do. I honestly do.
But you love her as a provocateur and less as a commander-in-chief?
I was going to say entertainer.
I do have to say, forgive me for getting off of the Twid mission, but I did take the choice of doing a video statement as the kind of thing that a candidate does, not someone that a Fox News pundit does.
Yeah, you think a Fox News pundit would be able to scare up a real news studio.
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, it's like she doesn't have access to cameras.
Right.
But it was done almost like this, Western White House setting with the American flag in the backdrop and addressing my fellow American. I don't think she said my fellow Americans.
No. There was definitely a lot of effort put in to make it look presidential, no doubt about it.
Right. So, does that mean she's running?
No, we've discussed this before. Part of her brand, part of her selling point is the tease that she could run, is that she might and is a viable candidate. So, if she just, shows up in a golf shirt and a cigar in her mouth like Rush Limbaugh might, then the jig is up.
But I mean, she has the tease going regardless. The tease is already there. But this strikes me as a political decision. You're getting beat up in the media about this, and you need to do something dramatic to restore your reputation, or you won't be able to be a viable presidential candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I still think she'll run. I even think she'll show up at most of the events. We'll probably see her. Or probably name even on some ballots in Iowa. I don't see her lasting much beyond that. That's been my prediction since
Let
since
the
2008,
detail begin.
since November 2008.
Heritage's Conn Carroll destroys Palin candidacy.
No, just sticking with my same prediction.
Why does Heritage hate Sarah Palin?
I love her. Don't spread lies.
That would be the worst thing one could do. Separate from the tragedy in Tucson, there is a simmering political issue out there. Won't necessarily hit the floor of Congress until the spring, but there's already a lot of jockeying around it, and this is the issue of the debt ceiling. Periodically, the debt ceiling gets hit because of debts that have already been obligated through acts of Congress, but Treasury can't follow through on those unless Congress then does a second step of raising the debt ceiling, and there's usually a lot of huffing and puffing before these votes because it looks bad on the surface. It looks like you're extending the nation's credit card when all you're doing is generally making sure they can pay the creditors. And so people are trying to
Well,
attack.
that is what it is. You are raising the country's credit limit. I mean, it's exactly like a credit card.
If you want to misexplain what the actual issue is to the public, feel free.
Educate us.
Right, educate. That's Heritage's.
No, I'm asking you. Educate us. If that's an inaccurate way of describing it,
It is inaccurate.
Educate us.
It presumes that if you did nothing, that you would just be simply responsibly constraining American spending, when you would be preventing America from meeting debt obligations already made by the government, by the Democratic-elected Congress.
But I didn't know any of that. Here's what I do know. Your credit card company has an arbitrary limit on the amount that you can borrow, and if you push up against it, you have to get permission from them in order to raise it. And this is exactly like it. There's an arbitrary limit on the amount of money that the Treasury is allowed to go to the open market and sell, and we're about to hit it. I think they're pretty analogous.
But America is not a credit card company. America
it is
the government
it's an
that is
analogy.
structured differently than a credit card company.
I said it's like it. It's not the exact same.
It's not exactly it at all, which is why it's a different situation. And because of commentary like yours, it becomes a more politically complicated vote than it should be. Because of that fact, everyone is sort of uncomfortable about voting for it, although it usually gets done because if you didn't do it, it would sink the entire global economy into the abyss. It would destroy Americans' full faith and credit. But conservatives have been trying to say, we'll only do it if you also do very drastic deficit reduction the way we wanted to. But Paul Ryan, I know you love Paul Ryan.
I do.
He seemed to flinch. Jonathan Chait, among others, took note that he said that actually allowing default would be, quote-unquote, unworkable. And that kind of gives away the game. If you know you can't actually follow through on it, you got yourself a problem. I wrote a post myself pointing to Ryan and also Charles Krauthammer, who said, look, Kraut was trying to counsel conservatives, make your demands reasonable, because if you don't make them reasonable, Obama's going to call your bluff, which is acknowledging that it's a bluff, that no one's actually going to do it. And so this arguably changes the dynamic of the conservatives' ability to play this game of chicken when the top leaders have made very clear they're not willing to actually destroy the full faith and credit of the American economy. Are conservatives like yourself, who are big Paul Ryan fans, concerned that Paul Ryan doesn't know how to play this game?
No, let me ask you a question. So, I'll start with the Matt Iglesias post. He cites the same Paul Ryan interview that you did. And then he says, to raise the debt ceiling requires two things. First, the president has to ask for an increase in the debt ceiling, which he's done that, which actually Geithner did, to be technical. Second, Congress needs to pass an increase in the debt ceiling. Since Boehner and Ryan both favor increase in the debt ceiling, the burden now falls on them to round up the votes. There's nothing to negotiate with Obama about. So my question is this. Do you guys really believe that Paul Ryan and John Boehner are going to pass a clean debt ceiling raising bill? Like they're just going to say, we raise it to $16 trillion and we're not going to ask for anything else. We're not going to attach anything to it. Is that what you guys think is going to happen?
I think it might happen. I mean, I don't know if it will happen.
Well, let me
obviously,
just
Ryan and
abuse you,
Boehner don't want it to go like that. They want there to be conditions on it.
Okay.
But there may be pushback in saying, we're not going to put any conditions on it, and we all know you're not going to sink the American economy and the global economy, so suck it up.
Well, I think the actual order of what happens here matters, because first of all, what's going to happen is we're going to get close to mid-March or mid-May, whenever we actually do start pushing up against the ceiling, and Treasury is going to say, "Oh my God, we're running out of money," just like the Pentagon always says, "Oh my God, we're going to run out of money when we don't have appropriations for Afghanistan and Iraq." Well, of course, what happens is that they move some accounts here, move some accounts there, and it lasts, another 60 days before they really run out of money. It's going to be the same thing with the debt ceiling.
Well, I mean, that happened
when
they
Bill
extended
says
the time frame.
When Bill says that it won't be able to pay our debt obligations and crash the world economy, that's just not true. We're constitutionally obligated to first, number one, pay the interest on the debt. So the actual default is never going to happen. Other stuff will not get paid for first. That's what would actually happen. Is that other government functions
that they can do to extend
other government functions would not be. They're constitutionally obligated to number one, pay the debt first. So default is not going to happen. That part is 100% true.
We're talking about things that would temporarily extend what Treasury can do. It's not something they can do indefinitely.
No. I'm talking about
for a temporary period after they hit that initial.
So number one is move some accounts around. Number two is just not paying for other stuff. Whether it be Medicaid reimbursements or Medicare reimbursements, or less fund for states or less fund for transportation. They would just have to spend less. So what is never going to happen?
What Paul Ryan said.
What?
That doesn't seem to be what Paul Ryan said.
What is never going to happen is that the federal government would default on their debt, because they're constitutionally obligated to take those first dollars from the tax collections and pay the debt collectors first. So beyond that, we have to look at what's going to happen is that Boehner and Ryan are going to go to their caucus, and the new, highly stocked with Tea Party caucus, and as Matt Iglesias says, try to round up the votes. In order to get those votes, they're going to have to get something like, a balanced budget amendment, or say,
do you really think they're going to put in a balanced budget amendment?
Turning Medicaid into block grants.
Do you really think they're going to put Medicaid into block grants? I think Obama's going to sign that into law?
They're going to put something on it, and then the question is flipped. Geithner says the world's going to end unless the president signs this bill. So is the president willing to let the world end in order to preserve, the individual mandate? Or, let's say turning Pell Grants into entitlements. There are all kinds of palatable, sellable spending cuts that Republicans can attach to this that the president would pretty much have to sign.
We should point out that the individual mandate is part of a health care bill which cuts the deficit, so it would be very odd to do something that would increase the deficit as part of passing debt ceiling. I know you're very familiar with the CBO report on that.
Yeah, I've blogged about it many times.
It is probably likely they will put something on it. Although Obama could very well say, look, I have a long-range deficit reduction plan, and it is a separate issue than the debt ceiling, and let's deal with these things separately. But it's only possible they'll do something on there as a sweetener for Republicans. But I think having these wish list things would seem to violate what Krauthammer was talking about. Say, you won't allow me to completely gut Medicaid as a condition for signing the debt ceiling bill. That's probably not a game of chicken that's going to work out well for Republicans. That's the kind of game that Newt Gingrich played in 1995, which blew up in their faces.
Yeah, this is a more conservative Congress than the one that first voted down TARP. So I am very confident that they will be able to play a very convincing game of chicken on this.
Based on what Ryan just said?
Yeah. Based on
acknowledging that this can't happen, that he will not let default happen. You think he's playing a good game of chicken?
I do. I can guarantee you he will get some real spending cuts attached to the debt ceiling raise.
Well, perhaps we should leave it on that note. It's almost 4 o'clock. I know you got to jump.
I do. I have a meeting. I'd rather do this, though. Does that count for anything?
I'd always rather talk to you too, Conn.
I'd rather talk to you than go to my meeting. But I have to go to a meeting.
Well, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll have you on again.
I hope so.
We'll see you soon. We'll see you next week on This Week in Block.
Tell Matt and Chris I said hi.
Take care.